me. This has been my 7th year as an administrator, as an AP for K-8 before I became principal at a pre-K through 4 elementary in Edmonson County. And as part of that, I have been excited to just really trying to get to know my staff through these reflective conversations. And that's been the part that I've enjoyed the most, is learning them as staff members. So, and facilitating those conversations about the needs of the school. So Jessica, I'm gonna turn it over to you and let you talk for a little bit.
So this is my 3rd year as an assistant principal here in Shelby County, and I absolutely love what I am doing. Cognitive coaching has really stepped up my game. I have never been a coach, like an instructional coach or anything. I went straight from the classroom to be an assistant principal. So walkthroughs and doing classroom observations were a struggle for me at first because I had only done peer observations. So I know going through my program at Georgetown, I was like, that's something that I know I need to work on. So that's why I sought out this program for myself and to work on it through myself. So I love the way that it gave me my questioning ability, because that was just something that I naturally did in my classroom. So I can see how that has grown to now allowing my adult learners to continue to go as well. So I love being a part of this process, and I feel like that it has allowed me to get to know my teachers as well a lot better. So our next slide.
So just kind of talking about the mission for cognitive coaching, of course, is to produce that self-direction. And I think as an administrator, that's what we all want. I want teachers that have the ability to solve their own problems and to realize that there's a problem. And so cognitive coaching has really helped me to be more intentional with my conversations, to facilitate that trust with my staff, to facilitate that, look, you are perfectly capable as a professional, because I feel like teachers constantly are talking about that. We are the professionals. Why does nobody trust us as the professionals to make decisions? And so the cognitive coaching has really allowed me to have those conversations with my staff where they are doing that self-direction, self-management, self-monitoring. And the cognitive coaching part is really just to help them mediate their thinking. It's to get them thinking about what they're doing. What problems are you seeing in your instruction? What have you already tried to fix this? What do you know about from other places that have tried, or other resources, or your professional learning network? How have you tried to modify that instruction? And it's really giving them the opportunity to have that space and that time to think about what their professionalism tells them, that basically they have the skills and they have the ability to solve their problems and to direct their learning. And I feel like, as far as so far that I've done this year with my staff, and again, I'm new to my school, I'm new to this district, and came in on year 3, 2.5, I don't know what you call it anymore with COVID, of just everything being kind of a hot mess. But even in that bit of it, it's still allowing me to communicate the trust and to start building that trust as relationships with my staff. And then I'll let Jessica talk a little bit about 5 states.
With the 5 states of mind. And so as we think about when we go into a reflective coaching conversation with teachers, we need to kind of self-assess, where are they coming from? And so the 5 states of mind talk about, there are 5 states that we went over in depth. And the first one is consciousness, and then craftsmanship, efficacy, flexibility, and interdependence. And so if you flip to the next slide, it talks about how that each one of those, where depending on they are at, or where the teacher might feel that they are stuck, or where that they might be reflecting at, whether it's a lesson or a problem, that is where it allows us as the coach to be able to process where we need to coach where they are at and where we need to coach them to. Sometimes they're stuck in a problem, and we are not ones to, as coaches, to just give them the answers, because we know that even through our students, or even with our own children, if we do it for them, we're going to end up doing it for them again the next time. So that is why with cognitive coaching, we want them to allow them to have the voice and the choice and what they are doing with their lessons and with their teaching and with their students, so it becomes meaningful learning for them. But as a coach, we need to self-assess where they are at. So they might be in a lack of awareness of others and themselves. So we want them to be aware of themselves and others. And so that would be that state of consciousness. Are they vague or imprecise? and we want them to be specific. Do they think that it's everybody else's fault? Or are they able to think about what can I do? What was the blame on myself? And what can I change within myself to get results? So that has to do with efficacy. Are they very narrowed and want to blame others? Or are they able to think outside the box and to go and to venture out and to really put into practice some of the other things that maybe their other teachers are doing or things that they have heard? Are they willing to go and step outside? That depends on their flexibility. Are they isolated, or are they willing to be connected to their community and to their teammates? All of those different types of states depends on how we are going to coach them. And in the in-depth training through cognitive coaching, there are certain levels of questions that you would ask once you have, as the coach, developed where they are low and where they are high. When a teacher understands their problem and they have tried many different things, then you would say that they are high in consciousness and they might be low in flexibility because maybe they haven't tried to ask several other people, or maybe they're low in interdependence because they're not willing to work with other people. But when you have these conversations and you allow them to do all of the talking and you're just sitting there listening and pausing and allowing them to reflect, you begin to see what their true beliefs are. So when you notice that a teacher is low in one or more of the 5 states of mind, then that's where you would start your questioning from.
And I will say, when I first started kind of doing the practice with other people in the cohort, it felt awkward. And I'll be real honest, it still feels awkward because I feel like this is a complete mind shift from how you go about doing any type of observation as an administrator. Whereas before it's just, I'm going in, I'm looking at what you're doing, I'm thinking about, what I saw and what I heard, and then we're going to talk about that. And I would ask the teacher's opinion, what do you think went well, and so on. But it wasn't really focused on asking the teacher to reflect on their practice and asking the teacher to reflect on why they made the choices that they made about what they were doing in the classroom and what other things that they had considered. And so when we started practicing that with each other as part of this cohort, and then I was taking it back to my school and starting to practice those reflective conversations with my teachers, I really noticed a shift in how I was getting problem solving done on their end, where I would check back in. Hey, how is this going? The last time we talked about that, you were still having a problem. What did you decide to do? And they were able to give me answers. And that's not everything, because I've got interns like everybody else does. And to be, they'll even tell me, I don't know. Well, that's when I would start thinking, okay, well, I've got some ideas. Would you like to hear them? And you're switching from doing that just reflection to that. And so the why behind the conversations is giving that teacher that self-directedness, because you're going to get people that don't have the ability because they're new, they're lacking one of those states of mind, they're lacking the development there. And so they need that coaching, to switch for you as the administrator, to switch from just being a reflection and to helping them think about their thinking and their practice to actually being a consultant and saying, okay, well, I've done this problem before. Can I talk to you about some strategies that I've tried? Or I've seen another teacher do this in another classroom. Can I point you in their direction? But you have to do that because the teacher, I think that was the biggest thing for me, is I can't switch into that because I know that the teacher needs to do that they don't have anything in their toolbox for this problem. They have to get to that recognition themselves. And that is the part that's been really powerful about switching to this model of teacher observations and feedback, is getting the teacher to that realization that either A, they have tools in their toolbox for this, they just weren't aware of that, or B, that they don't, and being able to admit that and realize that that doesn't make you a bad teacher. That doesn't mean that you aren't capable of doing anything at school. I have a lot of teachers that I feel like are very anxious about doing things right all the time. And I appreciate that in some aspects because I worry about them less. But in other aspects, I'm like, you were great. You did a fabulous job with this. And then helping them to find those suggestions for that. And the mediative questions, which is what Jessica's going to talk about next, is what allows you as the coach to put the question between the coachee and their thinking. And so it's giving that type of feedback. The mediative questions is different from the other types of feedback that as an administrator, I learned to offer, whether I was making a judgment about what they were doing professionally, I was just providing personal observations, in my opinion. I was making inferences that because you were doing this and the kids were doing this, therefore this must be what was going on, or just giving them the straight data where I'm just, physically recording everything that I see and I hear, and I'm not making any judgments about it. But the mediative questions are allowing the teacher to dive into their own professional knowledge. And that would be, of course, your pedagogy, your knowledge of yourself, the interactions that you're having collegially with your peers, the cognitive processes that the students need to do that part of the instruction, what you know about your students and the relationships you have with them and how they learn. And then finally, what you know about your content. But that cognitive coaching piece and getting those mediative questions in front of the teacher has allowed that thinking to occur. Whereas if I was just offering straight data about what I saw in the classroom or making my own inferences or observations, it wouldn't be allowing that thinking to occur for the teacher. And then I will say, this is something that I found to be true. And this came from our seminar, but I do find that teachers are finding it more rewarding, that they're seeking me out to talk about things that they were interested in, that they have looked at, or when I'm checking back in, that they're developing more self-directedness as a whole, and capacity for themselves and all their states of mind, that they're becoming more thoughtful as a practitioner and a teacher, learning how to solve their own problems, and then eventually becoming less dependent on me as an administrator. I'm the sole administrator in this building, and I have a curriculum person, but she's not in a coach capacity, but becoming less dependent on us for assistance and being able to approach us with, I think I'm interested in this, and this is a problem that I'm having, and this is something that is a solution. And that's really what we want. And we want that insight to come from doing that type of thinking.
So the types of questions that she was talking about right there were the mediative types of questions. So again, it goes back to, you're not going to change somebody by just telling them to change. You have to have their buy-in. You want them to be able to understand the why behind. But again, if you just tell them, a lot of times you go back the next day and nothing has changed because they don't feel like that it's important. So again, these reflective conversations where that they are feeling like they are a part of it. So here are some invitational questions that you can start off with. So these are just a few that they gave of some examples. So what are some reasons that this happened? Or what are some reasons why you chose to do things a certain way? What might be the causes of why students were disruptive? What are some hunches? As you can see, a lot of these are plurals because we don't want teachers to just have a one answer solution. We want them to think about multiple ways and multiple solutions that they can solve their problems. As you examine your data, what are some of the similarities and differences? So we want them to be able to think about the past and think about the future and how that they can correct it or make it better. So all of those are invitationals to be a part of the conversation. Again, we want them to do most of the thinking, most of the talking. I think back to my own classroom of students when I did conferring with reading groups. I wanted them to talk about the reading. I wanted to hear what they had to think about the characters. Same with teachers. I want to understand why they are doing what they are doing. We want them to be able to recall the information. Sometimes they need our help on that because you get involved in your teaching, and just like Sarah was saying, you might have some data and feedback to be able to give them and say, this happened. So what are some reasons why you think that happened? Making some inferences, and then also some predictions about the future. And then after this whole entire conversation of being reflective, you want to be intentional. This conversation just didn't happen just to be like, oh, well, let's move on to the next thing. Excuse me. So we want to be able to set some intentionality goals and be able to say, this was important. This conversation shifted my thinking, shifted my practice, and here's why. So here's some question starters for you to be able to think. What might be some goals that you've selected for yourself now that you've maybe identified some things that you can work on? How are you going to get there? What beliefs might be connected to why this happened or that happened? Because we know that anything that happens to a teacher or even yourself, it's usually connected to a belief. So we want to dig down deep and figure out what that belief system is. And sometimes it takes many conversations to dig down to that belief. And sometimes it's the ugly truth that we don't even like to see sometimes. And I have been experiencing that for myself, even with some reflective conversations with my own coach about some things. So sometimes you just have to grit through it and understand, and then again, reflect and make a new goal and move on.
And then I'll say, trust is probably the key operation in this whole thing, that you've got to develop that trust with your staff. And that does take time. And as the principal in the building, I set the tone for that. I consider my number one responsibility is to take care of my teachers, because it's their number one responsibility to take care of their students. And so in order for me to do that, there has to be that trust developed in between me and the staff, that I have the best interest of the whole school at heart and in the forefront of my mind. I make sure that I'm emphasizing that through trying to develop that cooperation and caring culture. Teachers tend to trust each other more as friends or as work colleagues, but not necessarily based on their professional competence. That it's more about how they work together as a team and being friends with each other. And that high level of trust, though, is benefiting the teachers as a whole, because then they're more likely to become a true professional learning community. If they feel open about sharing something that they're struggling with, or things that they're struggling with finding resources for, or how to teach that, then you're getting that professional learning community coming out. That is a complete work in progress in my school right now. One, because of COVID and trying to take more things off teachers' plates. And two, just because there's been a lot of upheaval. I'm the third principal that they've had in 5 years. And so it's a slow and steady, with lots of little steps about, you can trust me and we're going to do this together, and it's going to take time. But I feel like the work that I'm doing here with this reflection and really asking them to think about what they're doing in the classroom and why they're doing that in the classroom and what other things have you considered, is allowing us to start developing that trust together. As part of the reflection conversations, you want to make sure that you're building your rapport with your teacher. And this is something that we have practiced a lot, and it still feels kind of awkward to me at times to really think about that I'm matching their body language, that I tend to be more serious on my face, and even if I'm not feeling really serious sometimes, and to make sure that I'm, leaning towards them, and my physical body language is matching theirs, that I'm just listening, that I'm giving them the time and the space to think. Because so much of school is making snap decisions all day long, that when you actually have that time to think, I feel like teachers sometimes feel like I'm taking too long and I should know the answer to this. And they're trying not to waste my time. And then also I think they're thinking about, it's my planning period and I've got all these copies to make, and I've got to go to the bathroom, and I've got to call a parent and everything else. And so it's trying to intentionally develop that time and that space by giving them the ability to pause and think about it. And I just listen, and then I'll paraphrase what they've said, and then I'll listen some more. And then I'll come up with a question that's generated to make them think about what they were doing in the classroom. So Jessica and I've listed out here kind of the 5 steps, the basic steps, if you're wanting to get started with doing any type of reflective coaching, the first is always just to listen. You're paraphrasing, you're summarizing what the teacher said, what you saw in the classroom, and supporting information, and just asking the teacher, how do you think it went? Once they get into that, then you start thinking about, why did you make some of those decisions? Tell me more about this. When you chose to do that in the classroom, what effect do you think it had on the students' thinking, or what effect do you think it had on the students' ability to understand this? And then continuing to develop that conversation to help them to construct new meaning, to think about how that's going to impact lessons in the future. And then also to come back to what we've called the really awkward question in our seminar about how has this conversation supported your thinking, which really I have a hard time asking, because I'm like, I don't need you to praise me, but it's really, I want teachers to think about it. I want them to think about it. And I've been very point blank forward with my teachers that they all know I've been out of the building for 2 days a month for the last 4 months. I'm going to learn how to do this better because I want to help you improve as a teacher and improve myself as an instructional leader. And so I'm going to practice some of the things that I've learned about. Are you okay with that? And do you want to join in this conversation with me? And it's been very deliberately invitational when I'm talking with teachers about it. And I've tried to not always tie it to their evaluation too. A lot of times it's coming in and asking about things that I saw when I was just walking in the classroom. Hey, that was really cool. How long have you been doing that? Or are there any other things that you're doing that look like that? Or, where'd you source that from? And I think in our last EAP meeting, we actually had somebody that gave us the tip about they do voice memos, which is my favorite tip because I hate handwriting anything. And so I've been recording myself and then just texting it to the teacher right there on the spot. So they've got my feedback. And then that's opening the door for further reflective conversations about what they're doing in the classroom and things that they're interested in. So I can get to learn and to know them as a staff and to know their strengths and weaknesses and how I can best support them as a teacher. And then this is kind of the map that we've used. It's what I consider my cheat sheet. And this is straight from the collaborative or the Thinking Collaborative website. These are available for purchase. The reflective conversation is just one out of the 4 types of conversations that you can have, and they're only $10. So if this is something that you're really interested in, we link the website at the end of this presentation, and you can order this for yourself if you'd like to start practicing doing these types of conversations with your teachers.
I think also it allowed, once some of my teachers who I had done more reflective conversations with, it was easier for them to start questioning one another about their practice as well. So like in PLCs and in data teams and things like that, some of the questions that I had asked in their one-on-ones ended up showing up in some of the other things. So I was excited that it was overflowing and going into other realms of their teaching so that they could help each other and question and hold each other accountable. And I think that's what we want as all teachers and as all administrators, to be able to, have that open and safe space to be able to think about that. So I think the most way that I had been able to use the reflective conversations is when I was doing my evaluations in the fall. And there were several ways that we had talked about this in our seminar. And one was allowed to do when we did the reflective conversation before we actually went over their TPEGs, I guess you can call it, framework for their evaluation. Some pros about that is that the teachers were very open and very willing to talk about their lessons. The con about that was that once I had talked about maybe some, putting on my hat, as we would say in the professional development for coaching conversations, about how that I did have to, as a principal, give some evaluative feedback, it kind of deflated them a little bit. And it was harder for them to come back up to say, now, do you remember what you said you did well? Do you remember how you said that you were going to walk out of here and do some changes? So that was a little bit harder when that type of situation had. And then in our professional development, some people said that they did it at the end. So that was good that they had gone through the whole evaluation process and they had gotten their scores. And then they were able to remember it a little bit better. But then Maggie McGoffa, I believe is her last name, how you say her last name, but she said that when she would do reflective conversations and be a principal or have to evaluate somebody with a score, she would just simply say that you would tell them, now I'm going to be your principal and I'm going to give you a score for this. And now I'm going to be your coach. So let me give you a question to think about. And I felt like that is something that would be the most beneficial, is that you can be able to have that ebb and flow of the conversation through your evaluation process. But I had not tried that yet. I had tried the first one where we had done the reflection conversation first and then the evaluation. So, but I will say that there have been a lot more times where I'm just reflecting back through walkthroughs with my teachers, where that these are becoming a lot easier as I have more and more of them, and they're not as long. It's not a sit down in the office. It's just a quick catch you in the hallway or catch you at the bathroom type of a conversation. So it doesn't have to be as heavy as it was at their evaluation time.
And I'll add in with that. I tend to do the coaching before the feedback as well, because I want teachers to really start reflecting about what they thought without my judgment coloring that. But I have also found a lot more success with just making it much more part of my informal walkthroughs, casual conversations. I'm not filling out a form. I'm not giving you a piece of paper. This is just a conversation. I noticed this in your room. This was great. Or when I came in, the kids were doing this. What was the decision that you were thinking about that led you to think this was what students need to be doing? Or how did you decide to group your kids? If I'm coming in and I've got a first grade classroom and everybody's doing centers, how did you decide to group those kids? Like, these obviously are differentiated because I watched this group switch to that center and they weren't doing the same thing. What did you decide to do to group those students today? How do you feel about, some of the decisions that you made that led to putting those students together, and just really starting to develop that conversation with the teacher that allows them to think about their practice, but also allows us to explore more together. And I've offered sometimes when, have you ever heard of professional development I went to? Kagan would be a good example. Trying a strategy for this, or is that something you're interested in learning about, or what are some things that you've heard about that you're interested in learning about that have to do with this topic, and just providing that avenue for teachers to start thinking about those reflections and to build that trust as a school community. So I think that is about it. If anybody's got any questions, Jessica and I both are available on email, and then there's my Twitter handle. And then if you're interested in ordering those mats, the Thinking Collaborative website is linked there as well. All that's linked on the main grid, this slideshow as well. And then I know Jenny just posted the link for, if you're interested in applying for the CAP program for next year, which you've not done, I would highly, highly recommend it. It has been an amazing cohort. I have learned so much from administrators across the state, and just completely changed some of my thinking as an administrator.
Well, we want to thank you both so much, Sarah and Jessica. Thank you so much for sharing your learning with others. And just want to open it up. If you do have any questions, please unmute or type them in the chat, and I'll go ahead and stop the recording.